I said we're in the city of New Orleans, and that means because we're in the city of New Orleans, we are in ground zero for what happened in the aftermath of Katrina. Remember, our friends over in Ocean Springs, Biloxi, and Gulfport really took the brunt of the actual hit. What happened in New Orleans was that after a pretty darn good hit itself, its levees collapsed. It collapsed in both directions. To give people a sense of this, they didn't just collapse in New Orleans East, where often they have problems because of the surge. They collapsed in Lakeview, right out by the lake, and essentially turned the city of New Orleans into a giant bowl. My mom and dad lived at the corner of what is now Allen Tucson and West End Boulevard. Dre, they lived less than 7 blocks away from the 17th Street Canal. They got, brace for it, 13 feet of water in 30 minutes. If they had not been there, they would have been on their roofs. If they had been there, if they had not left, they would have been on their roofs if they could have gotten up there in time. That's how fast it happened. I bring all of this up because Dylan Wecht, TAT's Director of Public Sector Engagement, is actually here this morning to have a discussion. And this really applies to a lot of you guys because there are natural disasters that you guys have been taking care of. North Carolina, the fires out in California. We can go on for a while. You will be actually driving into those areas to bring relief and assistance. There's some things you should look for beyond just the assistance that people need with rebuilding and food. There are going to be a lot of vulnerable folks on the ground there. And I think that's kind of what you want to kind of dig into, don't you, Dylan? And good morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for having me, and that's exactly right.
Let's kind of talk about this. And guys, go to tatnonprofit.org, tatnonprofit.org. Make sure you head over there. It's also on the Book of Face, the Gram of Insta, and over on LinkedIn. Let's just kind of dig into this too. Let's talk about what you do as the Director of Public Sector Engagement, and then we'll kind of, talk about how it is TAT wants our friends out there to respond to natural disasters.
Absolutely. So, TAT, formerly known as Truckers Against Trafficking, we work with both the transportation industry, which obviously includes trucking, then bus, energy, railroads, local drivers, anything that you can group into the transportation sector. And then we work with the public sector as well, which would be local, state, provincial, federal governments throughout North America, obviously, as well as law enforcement and prosecutors. So my role as the Director of Public Sector Engagement, really working on that public sector side, training, assisting, and running public sector and law enforcement initiatives. So that's kind of a summary of my role.
And I want to kind of talk about what it means in regards to what a natural disaster can mean for what I call predators. I mean that they create these vast open spaces of dark possibility is the way I've often, having lived through Katrina, having gotten back in 3 days after it took place, I saw a lot of what kind of transpired on the ground. And when I saw this was your topic, I said, wow, this is a spot-on conversation, especially with the transportation industry to have.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about the impact of natural disasters and what they mean towards trafficking.
Absolutely. So we'll get to Katrina in a bit, but when you're looking at human trafficking, a key thing to recognize is that this is not a crime that discriminates. It happens anywhere and everywhere. So what traffickers are looking for, they're trying to exploit vulnerabilities. And when you think about what a natural disaster does to a community, to a family, to their jobs, to their living conditions, this is creating a lot of vulnerabilities, right? So this is going to be fertile grounds. It's going to be the perfect position for a trafficker to step in and offer what that person needs, whether it's a job, whether it's a house, somewhere safe to be. They're going to come in and take advantage of that. So when you have a natural disaster, whether it's a hurricane or a tornado or a fire that displaces people, the traffickers are going to be right there, either taking advantage of those who were already vulnerable or who now have these new vulnerabilities.
I'm going to say this really quickly, and you can either kind of adjust it for what I'm saying. But
Absolutely.
one of the things I noticed that happened after Katrina was there are young people who are looking for food. There are people who are looking for any sort of hope, and often you'll find that people who are desperate gravitate into natural disasters areas because there are people there doing good work, giving out food, have a cot. Try to make space for people to keep them comfortable. And so a lot of people come down there, a lot of runaways, a lot of people sometimes looking for an adventure. end up in these places. What they don't realize is that the people who exploit people like that often show up soon after looking for the same sort of option and possibility. That's something that I noticed happened on the ground a lot. I noticed people where it's like, are you from here? No. Why did you come down here? I was hoping to find work or I was hoping to find food. Is that something? How do we deal with that? How do we make sure that those people are taken care of even when they shouldn't be down there?
Yeah, like you said, the majority of people are good. They have good intentions. They are coming to help, whether that's helping out at a shelter or a food bank, or in the trucking industry, bringing down goods or whatever is needed to that area. But like you said, at those areas, whether it is a housing facility or a food shelter, that is where traffickers are going to be. It's very similar what you see just in everyday life with foster homes and facilities that take care of minors. Traffickers will actually hang out there. They will locate these facilities because they are looking for these vulnerable individuals who need something. So to the people who are going to help, whether you're handing out food or you're assisting in some manner, what you want to look for is obviously individuals who may be very timid, or it seems like they may be under some kind of control. And the biggest thing that we can do is, one, just be a kind individual. You have conversations with them, you listen to them, you gain their trust. And you can also hand out materials, show resources, posters, that kind of stuff, because a lot of these individuals are not aware of the crime of human trafficking, or not aware that it is happening to them, whether they are in it or they're in that grooming phase.
And let's talk about the grooming phase for a second here so people understand what's going on. One of the
Sure.
things that a lot of people I have talked to, a lot of my friends in law enforcement that I still have, will tell you if, in fact, you're talking to somebody vulnerable or somebody that appears vulnerable, you can go a long way by bringing over other people that you're not connected with. You know, when you're talking with 3 and 4 people as opposed to just one, don't isolate the person, don't take them to the side. Make sure that there are lots of people around them. Make sure that, like I said, there is a sense of predators work in very, very different ways, but many of them, the idea is to create isolation. It's always kind of helpful if you can get these younger people or anybody vulnerable. Like you said, it affects everyone of all ages, all races, all backgrounds, to make sure that they understand that public places with lots of different people often are one of the best preventatives from that happening in terms of engagement. How did I do?
Th- that's exactly right. And one thing I would add to that is to give them choices. These are individuals, if they've been in a trafficking position or if they're very vulnerable, have not been given choices that we're given in everyday life. So if you have the opportunity to say, hey, do you want to go to this room or this room? Would you like something to drink, a soda or a coffee? These are small little questions that are going to go a long way, because again, these people, whether they have been under control or they're being isolated and groomed, they're not given a lot of choices in their everyday life. So if you can give them some kind of choice when you're having these conversations, that can really go a long way with these victims of human trafficking.
Before we pivot over to Hurricane Katrina, can you kind of give examples to let our listeners know? I mean, they're starting to get a really good picture from how you and I are talking because we're getting closer and
Mhm.
closer to specifics. But talk about trafficking cases in recent natural disasters.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's been a few studies, and they've looked at a few natural disasters. So most recently, obviously, everything that's been happening in North Carolina, they've reported an increase in sex and labor trafficking risks, specifically after Hurricane Helene. And then looking at the wildfires that were in Lahaina, Hawaii, 1 in 6 female survivors of that wildfire felt forced to engage in sexual acts in exchange for basic necessities. So we're talking about food, clothing, housing, what we've been talking about before. And then the last one that I'll note, looking at Houston, Texas, specifically citing Hurricane Harvey after 2017, they found that 1 in 3 construction workers in the Houston area had experienced labor trafficking. So we're talking about both sex and labor trafficking here when it comes to natural disasters.
Okay, so let's kind of talk about Katrina in particular. As you probably have
Mhm.
guessed, it's near and dear to my heart in regards to what the people that I love. And, my dad made a really good point. He says, when your house burns down, your neighbors come to help you. When everybody's house burns down, you're often waiting for help and you don't often know the people that are helping you. So can we kind
Mhm.
of talk about what that looked like? Because Katrina sadly provides a really amazing case study for the vulnerabilities that result in the aftermath of a natural disaster in regards to trafficking. Can you kind of unpack that for us?
Absolutely. And your dad made a very good point. I mean, we've talked about the housing insecurity and job insecurity, but big things to note are that isolation and lack of support because everyone is in the same boat. And government agencies or aid workers who are coming are sometimes isolated from that area. So that's obviously what we're seeing in all natural disasters, but specifically with Katrina being one of the most destructive natural disasters in U.S. history. I mean, resulted in the death of over 1,800 people, displaced over a million. So we're talking about a massive storm here that caused upwards of, I think it was $125 billion in damage. Um, after they were able to get in there and obviously start helping people and speaking to people, starting those criminal investigations, there were at least 3,700. I think a figure I have is 3,750 potential victims of human trafficking in that entire Gulf Coast region post Katrina. A lot of those were for labor. So again, mass displacement, homelessness, financial hardship. But then you had the lack of law enforcement ability to enforce criminal laws because of what was happening. And it was just exacerbated by the local government agencies being completely overwhelmed with their resources. So it was a major problem.
And by the way, we've opened the door on that too. That's something to really remember, guys, is the fact that I'll put it this way: in the aftermath of Katrina, the NYPD and the New York Fire Department showed up at the convention center and called a muster of all the law enforcement officers on the ground. And they said, "We are not here to police your city. We are here to make sure you guys have working showers, coffee, and around the clock mental health care. That's why we're here because we have gone through 9/11, so we know what you guys are kind of going through here." But that reminds people that in a natural disaster, one of the other things that traffickers exploit is that law enforcement and first responders are stretched to their breaking point. So, some
Hmm.
quiet conversation with some isolated construction worker, some displaced immigrant, or some runaway doesn't get noticed in the way that it would have gotten noticed in a normal functioning society, correct?
Absolutely. That is spot on.
So, can we talk about the idea of creating an infrastructure for natural disasters and what that looks like? The idea of an anti trafficking infrastructure for both companies, for both individual truckers and transportation folks, and for the public at large. How do we create an anti trafficking infrastructure for natural disasters?
Absolutely. So there are things that we can do before, during, and after natural disasters. Focusing on that before part, implementing training and trafficking awareness. I could not stress this anymore. For anyone listening who is in the truck industry, we offer free TAT training, which will give you those resources to be able to recognize what the crime of human trafficking is and who those potential victims are, as well as the intersections where you may run into them. But not just for those in the trucking industry. I mean, we're talking about bus, energy, and then obviously the public sector and law enforcement. Apart from training beforehand, before these natural disasters, I would stress building partnerships and disaster protocols, because once these natural disasters hit, often out of nowhere, you will resources will be stretched thin, as we talked about, and you'll have to stick to these protocols that have been practiced. And then another big one beforehand would be the ethical hiring of employees and third parties. This was a big thing that we saw in Katrina. Specifically with this one company, Signal International, they big lawsuit, and that had to do with third party contractors, so just ethical hiring. But then during the natural disaster itself, utilizing necessary resources and communication channels, handing out this human trafficking information, especially at whether it's the Red Cross sites, it's a housing shelter where those vulnerable populations may be. And then afterwards, again, in the rebuilding, ethical labor practices, continued human trafficking identification, and then sharing data and reporting it, just making sure that all of the agencies and everyone who is involved is on board. So a lot of different things that we can do to create this kind of infrastructure at all phases of a natural disaster.
Yeah, and the thing about ethical hiring that it's a ripple effect. The idea what people don't understand is that in the aftermath of Katrina, I'll use that as an example. There was a
Hmm.
lot of unethical hiring practices at all levels, not just with the big companies and
Yes.
subcontractors. People were doing it all over the place, and the problem is, especially when you have displaced people who actually live in those cities who are desperately looking for work, and they see themselves getting squeezed out for unethical hiring practices, it also creates resentment, anger. It creates situations where people who would normally have been helpful for displaced people or people struggling no longer, the Good Samaritan rule begins to collapse around you. And when people practice unethical sort of hiring practices, it puts a toxic veil on the community that makes it much less receptive to actually helping out the day to day stuff like looking for the signs of human trafficking, correct?
Yes, absolutely. That's correct. I mean, it's just so important. And going back to Katrina, as you mentioned, it wasn't just these big companies. I mean, obviously, these are the ones that made the news and the ones that we're able to look at. But this was happening everywhere, and it was affecting communities, both big companies and then, whether it's a small contractor or someone just hiring someone to help rebuild their home. It can happen at any level.
Well, and I wanted to ask you too about the fact of like talk about ethical behavior among companies. So you'll get like these larger or mid-sized construction, reconstruction companies, companies that actually have to have hubs. Look, just to kind of give you an example, if in fact people are rebuilding something or actually excavating something and they have to be on site, it means that a camp is going to pop up, meaning that the
Hmm.
often those people either stay in large hotels under subcontract or they stay in tent worlds as they begin to do the work. The problem is that it often feels like you have to hire the proper security around those places too, because it becomes very easy for predators and pimps to begin to kind of move sex trafficking through that as well too. The idea of offering a lot of these ground workers, what I would call illegal and illicit amenities, and so it becomes a matter of working with the partners, but also making sure that part of your budget is hiring security to look out for those kind of what I call subcultures in the culture of rebuilding.
Yes, that's a really good point. Both these temporary camps and the permanent ones. I mean, I've visited a number of them. I'm thinking right now specifically in northern Canada, but security is so important, obviously, at these facilities because in some of these towns, or if we're talking about natural disasters in areas that are completely isolated, other than the locals and these camps. Um, you're talking about, yeah, illicit activities that can happen there. And then I would say beyond the control of these camps, having protocols, having regulations for your employees, that you know makes it clear that they should not be engaging in these activities, in these commercial sex activities, because both around these camps, in the cities and towns around these camps, traffickers are actively bringing their victims to these towns because they can generate a higher profit, because we're talking about camps of hundreds, thousands of oftentimes younger men who are making a lot of money. So it is absolutely happening at these camps.
Yeah, and the other big thing too is the fact that I always remind people that the Confederacy was the fastest growing economy in the world in 1859 because it didn't have to pay for its labor. And a criminal organization, this is the other thing about trafficking. You said it's people always just want to talk about, the sex trafficking aspect. People don't understand, you're right, it's a labor aspect, but they also become the foot soldiers because they want these people who have, no identity, no one seems to care about them. They want them on the front line running their criminal activities because when those people go to jail, they can just cut them loose. And
Hmm.
that's the thing about trafficking too, is that it actually creates a criminal network because it uses a lot of these people as its foot soldiers and as its fodder. How did I do on that?
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely nailing it. That's spot on. I mean, the first example that comes to mind are these illicit marijuana farms that are all over the country, but especially out west. So you're having labor trafficking victims who are engaged in agriculture, in farming, but they're also involved in this criminal network of growing, distributing, transporting marijuana and sometimes other drugs. So you're absolutely right, and that can happen at any level, at any place.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, and the thing about what we're talking with Dylan Wecht about this morning, he, by the way, is TAT's Director of Public Sector Engagement. And this is so important. I mean, this is how they get people. It's like, hey, you're going to be an outlaw. You're going to be on the edge of things, charting your own course, doing your own thing, and that is I think the most sinister thing is a lot of the times, opportunity, adventure, and romance are sold in this really ugly package to kind of seduce people into falling into these worlds when they have no other option. We've only got a few minutes left here. I kind of want you to tell us what's going on next, what plans you got. Is there anything new you guys are looking at implementing? I mean, this natural disaster plan is spectacular, by the way, and such an important part of because these almost become like these kind of patient zero moments. These become moments where people actually really get pulled into this stuff. What else you guys got up your sleeve? What's going on?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this natural disaster human trafficking intersection work. This is the first time that we're publicly sharing this, on the radio or to other partners. So this is a big line of work that is currently in the process. We will be developing materials and resources that will go with our trainings for these individuals who will be transporting goods or working in these areas. And we're also working and looking at the FIFA World Cup, which will be taking place throughout North America in 2026, because obviously with big sporting events, that has a lot of potential for human trafficking as well. So those are two big ticket items that we're working on right now.
Promise me at some point we'll come back and we'll talk about the y'all's efforts around FIFA, because that has many similarities to a natural disaster.
Yeah.
If anybody's actually been to a soccer match, knows what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to British fans. That being said, it is important to remember that there are a couple of similarities, but there are some big differences too, because natural disasters are about grief. Stuff like FIFA, the real danger point is kind of like an alcoholic who's actually been 2 years sober, who ends up at a wedding where they're having the time of their life. Stuff like FIFA is that it's like you literally,
No, you're right.
You're exploiting joy. I mean, there's a joy about that. Everybody, when you wear somebody's colors, you make a friend instantly. You know what I'm saying? If you like the same soccer team, you make a friend instantly. If you're from the same country, you make a friend instantly. And sometimes making a friend instantly is a lifelong treasure, and sometimes it's the introduction to a nightmare. So we just got to kind of keep talking about this stuff. What you got planned for the rest of the week? What's going on, man?
The rest of the week, just working with our law enforcement partners throughout the country and Canada as well, getting ready for the fall conferences and law enforcement training. So never a dull moment.
TAT, by the way, guys, is a 501c3 that stands committed to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of key industries and agencies to combat human trafficking. Don't forget that truckers, transportation, and trucking are at the center of so much of it, because they touch almost every industry in America. I can't thank you enough for making the time for us. Go have the best of days. Thanks for sharing this important information with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and look forward to our next conversation.
Dylan Wecht is TAT's Director of Public Sector Engagement. Big thanks to him.